A very warm welcome to everyone. So we're going to be discussing one or two questions today. And the first question is, what in your experience made the biggest difference to a loved one towards the end of their life?
My mother went into hospital and had a long spell in hospital, which was an absolute nightmare, to be honest. And I think what made the biggest difference for her was when she needed to leave hospital, she had to go into a nursing home. But we were really fortunate in the home that Mum went into. And I just think that made a big difference, both to her and to us. It was just the element, the kind of caring and the nurturing that was available in that home, and the way that she was looked after made all the difference. And they were really sort of sensitive to her needs, and it wasn't at all simple because she had to be tube fed, and it wasn't a very good experience at all, the whole thing. But that made it less upsetting.
My father had dementia for the last 10 years of his life, so spent a long time in a care home environment and many trips with illness in and out of hospital. And the hospital experience was not pleasant at any single one time. There seemed to be a lack of understanding of the dementia in many areas. But cutting a very long story short, the care home itself was a very positive experience all the way through, hugely supportive. And apart from, it would have been nicer maybe for him to have his last hours at home, that care home was his home at that point. And it was the care shown to not only my dad, but to my mother and myself in particular for those last, 24 hours at his bedside, which was unparalleled and made a massive difference to how we coped with it. And afterwards as well, because we were invited back in to see some of the team and say our goodbyes, because they've become quite a large part of our lives as well.
What I found is that there's a big appreciation just being treated normally, with humour, not as a case for sympathy necessarily. It's just being treated as you've always been treated, really. So the second question is, let's quickly chat about something we'd like to do before we die.
I don't have a bucket list as such, but obviously over the last year various things have happened personally, and I think what I've sort of taken away from that is now, when it is sort of getting to the end, I'd just be happy to look back and know that I've lived a happy life and that I've done everything that I wanted to do, whether that's big or small. So it could be jumping out of a plane, maybe you won't be able to do that, but sort of the small things like spending time with family and friends. I think that's probably my bucket list, is a happy life.
Does anyone ever have that ambition to see others to a certain stage in their life, like seeing, if you have children, their wedding day, or at least see them settled and happy in life in some ways, which we don't necessarily add to bucket list. We tend to think about experiences, don't we? But sometimes it can be just those natural progressions that you'd kind of expect to have in life. But when you think about them, you tend to think, actually, I do want to be around to see that if possible.
I am turning 40 in November. And a few months ago, a friend told me about her experience of turning 40. And beforehand, she wrote a 40 for 40 list, which was basically 40 things to do, not by the time she was 40, but in that sort of decade, I suppose. And it sounded like a really good idea to me. So I did my own. And it was actually quite liberating, because it just gives you permission to put anything and everything down on it, from the tiniest things to the biggest things. And even if it's something that you never end up doing, it's still it's the thrill of sort of putting it on there and sort of imagining it happening. Even I agree with Katie as well, knowing that you've lived a life full of love and done the best you can, I suppose, is the ultimate bucket list.
I've experienced two people right at the end of life. They both said the same thing to me, which is, don't forget the love. And I guess you can interpret that in many ways. But I found that quite profound, really, that was their conclusion to life, really, was don't forget the love.
I did a course when I lived in Somerset, and it was a year to live. So it was an experiment with somebody. It was all started around meditation. and it started to examine your life and what would you do differently if you knew this, if you knew you only had a year to live. And like you said, Lucy, that actually when it all boiled down to it, it really wasn't the biggest things. It was making sure your quality of life whilst you were alive was good, and that you were surrounded by happy things.
If you could pledge one thing to support others in your community experiencing end of life, or possibly loss or bereavement, what would it be?
I would pledge that I'd promise to care about the person, about who they are as a person, and help them to live their life, and the people that are important to them, that I take note of them and who they are so that they live as themselves until they die.
What I would like to promise is that for people who are bereaved, that they don't get ignored or sidelined as a result. There's an acknowledgement of their situation from me, and about sort of old adage, isn't it, about time heals all. So that kind of recognition that isn't the case, and really acknowledging people's grief.
If I were to make some pledge would be to not to ignore, really. Yes, it might make you feel uncomfortable, but it's important not to kind of leave people behind like that. And I suppose really just to personally be confident and to show empathy.
I think what connects us all is that actually, when it boils down to it, what we really want is people to care and to listen to us, show that support and not forget us. Like you said, Rachel, not forget those people that maybe that drop off the radar, that actually we keep an eye on our family, our friends, our neighbours, people in our community. And I think we're all probably all agreed the same, really.